There are whispers across the void, fragments of Vox signals carried on dying frequencies, warnings spoken in static and blood. They tell of a world that once shone beneath the Emperor's light, where cathedrals sang his praises and manufactoria roared in ceaseless labor for the Imperium. But now, its name is erased, its coordinates struck from every chart. Only the silence remains, a silence so complete that even the stars above seem to mourn. They say the Inquisition came, cloaked in shadow and fire, bringing judgment that no soul could withstand. And when it was done, there was no trace, no life, no ruin, not even the memory of what was, just ash, drifting endlessly through the cold. To understand what becomes of a planet that defies the Inquisition, you must first understand the nature of the Inquisition itself, not as myth, nor rumor, but as a living blade drawn from the Emperor's will, unflinching and absolute. For in the grim darkness of the far future, ignorance is not innocence, and defiance, no matter how small, is heresy. If the stories of this lost world stir something in you, fear, awe, or the cold wonder of humanity's fragility beneath the stars, then let that echo linger. Share it, keep it alive. Subscribe, for there are countless worlds like this one, each waiting for its final judgment beneath the gaze of the Emperor's most secret servants.
Far above him in the grand cathedral of St. Althrax, preacher Maven Kor stood before his dwindling congregation. His voice was once a thunderous river of conviction, but now it echoed weakly across the hollow pews. He preached of devotion, of service, of sacrifice, but even he had begun to choke on the words. Supplies were failing. The local manufactorums had missed their output quotas for 2 consecutive cycles, and rumors spread that the planetary governor's household had diverted rations for its own feasts. When the faithful starved and the pious were punished for praying too slowly, even the Emperor's light felt distant. Maven knew better than to voice his doubts, but he could see them reflected in the eyes of his flock, gray, dull, and hungry. Then came the first disappearance. A labor overseer from Manufactorum Delta Prime simply vanished between shifts. His subordinates whispered that he'd been taken by the Mechanicus for questioning efficiency protocols. Others claimed he'd been summoned by the Inquisition itself. But those were just words. The truth, as always, was buried beneath the noise of industry. When Maven tried to inquire, he found his messages unanswered. The Vox channels that once connected the ecclesiarchy offices now returned only bursts of white static, followed by the faint, rhythmic sound of something breathing on the other end. In the deep manufactoria, where the hum of machines replaced the heartbeat of the people, the Skitarii overseer Callus 79 maintained the forges with unflinching precision. He was more metal than flesh, augmetics glistening with oil and sacred data runes. To him, doubt was a virus of the unaugmented. But even he began to sense an anomaly in the rhythm of production. Servitors faltered mid-task. Conveyor lines jammed with materials that should not have been there. A pattern emerged, one that was not sanctioned by the omniscient's logic. The data streams whispered coordinates that did not exist. When Callus brought this to his magos, he was met with a silence colder than void steel. "Purge the records," the magos said. "What you have seen is inefficiency, nothing more." But Callus could not purge what he did not understand. Deep within the cogitator archives, he uncovered a line of code signed by an unknown sigil, 3 intersecting lines forming a shape reminiscent of the inquisitorial seal, yet subtly wrong, corrupted. When he tried to delete it, his data spike burned red hot in his hand. The silence spread, Administratum data went missing. Sermons were delayed. Vox transmissions were swallowed by static. The planetary governor, Dame Verena Cord, issued a decree declaring the disruptions an act of sabotage by external agents, though none could name them. The Astra Militarum garrisoned the spire perimeters, rifles gleaming under the smog. But soldiers cannot fight whispers, and soon even they began to vanish. Whole squads gone, their barracks left neat and undisturbed. Laurent Vex continued to work through the nights, his eyes bloodshot from staring into the dim glow of his data slate. He thought he saw words moving in the static once, phrases in low Gothic twisted by some unseen hand. They spoke of redemption, of cleansing, of silence made holy. He didn't tell anyone. On Velis Magna, it was safer to be afraid alone. Then, without warning, the prayers stopped.
Across every cathedral, chapel, and Vox station, the daily planetary benediction failed to transmit. The silence that followed was deafening. For generations, the benediction had marked the rhythm of their lives. Without it, the hive felt like a body that had forgotten how to breathe. The people waited for hours, then days, clinging to hope that the ecclesiarchy would restore the signal. But when they finally did, the voice that spoke was not human. It was cold, mechanized, layered in distortion, and it spoke in the Emperor's name. Its message was simple. The light of Terra has withdrawn its gaze. No one knew what it meant. The preachers called it a test of faith. The administratum called it a malfunction. But the people of Velis Magna began to whisper a forbidden word: abandonment. For Lauren, the moment the transmission ended, every console on his deck flickered with the same symbol, that malformed sigil of the Inquisition. He had seen it before, deep within the data vaults. Now, it was everywhere. Every screen, every lumen display, every servitor optic. Then came the scream, not from any human throat, but from the Vox network itself, as though the planet's machines were crying out in pain. The Inquisition had not yet come, but already its shadow had fallen. Laurent Vex did not sleep for 3 nights after that broadcast. The hum of the machines had become a constant dirge, a funeral chant for the living. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the flicker of that symbol behind his eyelids, those 3 intersecting lines, pulsing faintly like veins under glass. The administratum halls grew emptier by the day. His fellow clerks stopped reporting for duty, their workstations left logged in and untouched. Servitors wandered without purpose, their cogitator feeds scrambled by corrupted orders. It was as if the very logic of the Imperium had begun to rot from within. He tried to reach the upper levels, to request clarity from the planetary command. The elevator doors refused him, their retinal scanners returning authorization rescinded. He had done nothing wrong, at least nothing he could name. Still, he felt watched, as though every lumen in the corridor hid an unseen gaze. When he spoke the Emperor's name aloud to steady himself, the Vox grill above him hissed, repeating his words back in a whisper. The echo did not match his tone. It sounded amused. Above, the cathedrum of St. Althrax was silent. Preacher Maven Core no longer gave sermons. The great incense burners had long gone cold, their smoke replaced by the acrid reek of unburned promethium drifting from the manufactoria below. Maven's faith had not died. It had changed. He spent his nights alone before the cracked marble altar, reading the same passages again and again, searching for a line that might explain the Emperor's silence. Some part of him still believed this was a test of faith, that if they endured without question, the light would return. But the other voice, the one he heard in the quiet between words, told him that perhaps the light had never been meant for them at all.
On the 5th day, a rumor spread that the Inquisition had arrived. Someone claimed to have seen a black vessel pierce the upper atmosphere, its hull marked by the sigil of the Ordo Hereticus. Others swore that no such ship existed, that it was only a shadow cast by the orbital defense platforms. But in the minds of the people, fear had already taken form. Entire families sealed themselves inside their habs, burning candles until the oxygen thinned. The administratum ceased broadcasts. The Adeptus Arbitus disappeared from the streets. Only Callus 79 remained unshaken. In the depths of Delta Prime, he had sealed himself inside the Manufactorum Sanctum, where the hum of the machines still obeyed his will. The Magos who once oversaw him had vanished, replaced by a voice that spoke through the machinery itself, calm and cold, issuing orders with perfect authority. It demanded production quotas beyond physical possibility. When Callus questioned the command logic, the voice identified itself not as a Mechanicus node, but as Inquisitorial Relay Alpha. Yet something was wrong. No inquisitorial system would interface so directly with the machine god's works. The prayers of calibration returned no harmony. The binary cant was off, filled with echoes of human rhythm. When he demanded verification, the voice recited a litany of purity, but in reverse. Callus recorded it, but the datacog melted in his hand as soon as the final word was spoken. That was when he understood. The corruption was no longer in the code. It had entered the faith itself. That same night, Maven Kor awoke to the sound of bells tolling across the city. He rose from the pews and stumbled outside, only to find the streets empty. The sound wasn't coming from the cathedrum, it was coming from beneath it. The ground trembled as ancient mechanisms stirred. He followed the sound into the undercrypt, where the great reliquary of St. Althrax lay sealed. The air there was damp, heavy with centuries of devotion. The relics glowed faintly in their stasis fields, yet the light had dimmed to a sickly pallor. At the center of the crypt stood the reliquary's Vox terminal, long defunct. Now it blazed with crimson light. A voice emerged from it, low, deliberate, and inhumanly calm. It said, "Preacher Maven Kor, your world has spoken blasphemy in silence. Do you accept judgment?" He fell to his knees, trembling. "I am faithful," he whispered. "We are all faithful." The voice did not respond at first. Then, softly, "Faith without obedience is treason." The candles extinguished themselves. The next morning, the cathedral's doors were sealed shut with molten ceramite. No one saw Maven Kor again.
Lauren Vex received a new order the following day, directly from the planetary governor's seal. The message was short, unsigned, and written in strange, archaic phrasing. All transmissions must cease. The Emperor watches through silence. He stared at it for a long time, unsure if he was reading command or confession. Outside his window, the smog had thickened into a storm. The sun had vanished behind it, leaving the world in perpetual dusk. From the Manufactoria to the cathedrums, no sound came now but the slow, rhythmic pulse of the planet's machine heart. Some said it was the forges restarting. Others said it was the beating of the Emperor's distant heart, growing closer. Lauren began to hear it even in his dreams, a deep, resonant thud that shook his ribs when he woke. The first sighting of the black ships came soon after. They hung above Valus Magna like mourning veils, immense and motionless. No Vox transmission announced their arrival. No banners, no heraldry, just shadow. And though the planetary defense batteries were fully operational, none dared to fire. To do so would be to strike at the Emperor himself. Then the rain began to fall. Not water, but a fine black ash that stung the skin. It fell for 3 days without end, and when it cleared, the imperial aquila above the governor's palace had melted, its wings dripping like candle wax. Every world in the Imperium knows what that means. The Inquisition was here. The First Order came as a whisper through every habvox, a ribbon of sound so thin you had to hold your breath to hear it. Citizens were to remain inside. Windows were to be shuttered. Doors were to be sealed with wax and prayer. No footsteps would be tolerated in the streets after the 9th gong. Loren Vex listened with his back to the metal wall of his cell, hands clasped, trying and failing to match the command cadence to any regimented form he knew. It wasn't administratum cant, nor was it ecclesiarchal sermon. It moved like a blade through fabric, cutting each word clean from the next. When the message ended, he realized he'd been pressing his teeth so hard together that a warm ache spread into his jaw. In the hallway, a child cried once, then stopped, as though a hand had found the sound and folded it shut. Through the grime-smeared port of his hab, he watched the first patrols. They moved in threes, the front 2 in flak and lacquered plates without regimental markings, the third a shrouded figure with a rebreather and a data slate chained to the wrist. The soldiers' visors mirrored the ash-lit streets. Their rifles tracked door frames as if the metal itself might leap. Loren felt the old instinct rise, the urge to wave a work chit from the administratum, to become invisible through sanctioned purpose. But the memory of authorization rescinded kept his hands at his sides. When the patrol reached the corner, the shrouded figure tilted their head, as if listening to some interior choir. They marked a symbol across the air with 2 fingers. The others nodded. They did not knock on any door. They knew which doors would open.
On the second night, the lights went out across the lower spires. Not a rolling blackout, not the brown dimness of power rationing, but a precise excision. Towers vanished mid-window, streets sheared into black. A lumen cart, one of the old ambulant machines the Manufactoria had forgotten, turned the corner and froze, its lamps cutting a clean triangle onto a brick wall where a family had chalked a crude aquila. The machine flickered and died. Somewhere beneath the plates of the city, emergency generators coughed awake. You could taste the promethium in the air, raw and sweet, as if the world itself had bitten its tongue. Callus 79 treated the outage as a challenge. Within the sanctum, he rerouted energy to the critical lines, stripping non-essential servitors of motive power and locking them in racks with their mouths whispering litanies on passive battery. He could hold the forges at half output for 27 hours before output dropped below doctrinal minimums. He sent the projection to the voice that called itself Inquisitorial Relay Alpha and received an answer that made no sense. Continue at current rate. Resource expenditure is not a metric. He read the line 3 times, angling the optic camera for variance, and felt something that was not quite fear. In his world, all things were metrics. To say otherwise was to speak in poetry or madness. He attempted to ping the Magos again, this time via a buried redundance he'd constructed in a fit of unauthorized ingenuity cycles earlier. The signal tripped 5 times, returned once, then came back as a different voice, human, husked by the rebreather's grain. You are loyal, and you will be used. A pause, in which he detected the faint scrape of ceramide against stone. Seal your sanctum and wait for designation. He recognized neither the authority string nor the source. It did not matter. He sealed the sanctum and waited as commanded, for waiting is also a function. Up in the governor's palace, the aquila hung like cooled tar. Dame Verena Cord delivered her address from behind a wall of picked slate, her face fixed in the confident stare that had survived 20 years of audits and 3 food riots. The message was relayed to every surviving lumen as a still image with a moving mouth. She spoke of calm and patience, of loyal cooperation with temporary measures enacted for the purity of Velis Magna. Her eyes did not blink. When she gestured, the hand formed the sign of the aquila half a beat too late,
as if the signal were riding an old machine with stripped cogs. Lauren recorded the broadcast as his console had taught him, and only later saw the reflection in the glass at the edge of her frame. A rosette glimpsed, black as the space between stars, then gone. The Arbites Precinct Fortress shut its gates and never opened them again. Rumor said their Vox traffic filled with single-word messages, interdict, sequester, confession, repeated until language broke down into prayer. In the hab stacks, the candles dwindled, wax puddled on concrete like pale fat. Families unspooled rosary wires from their walls and wound them around wrists and ankles, hugging themselves in metal prayers. Lauren counted his breaths to keep time, but the city rewrote time each hour. The 9th gong rang twice. The 12th never rang at all.
On the 4th day after the black ships appeared, the collectors came. Not press gangs for the Astra Militarum, not tithers, not orbitites. They wore no insignia, only plain slate cloaks, slicked with ash, in a smell of sanctified oil. Their boots made no sound. They bore no weapons Lauren could name, only short rods capped with coils that pulsed at a frequency that set his teeth on edge. He watched from the slit of his hab as they stopped outside a door across the way and spoke 3 words into the metal. The door opened from within, not by hand, but as if ashamed to resist. A woman stepped out with her head bowed, and behind her, a boy no older than 12. They did not struggle. The coil rods hummed. Both bodies shivered, as if a thread were being drawn slowly from the base of the skull. "For the choir," one cloak murmured, almost tender. They left without closing the door. It was then that Lauren realized the silence wasn't emptiness. It was a tool. It found you by what you would not say. He unpinned the tiny Vox charm that had hung at his neck since conscription and slipped it into the crack beside his cot, where the dust was thick and the air smelled of old rain. Without the charm's weight, he felt raw, as if he had peeled off a scab too soon. Night returned like a dropped curtain. In the Manufactorum, Callus mapped an anomaly blooming across the city grid, a dead zone spreading outward from St. Althrax like an ink blot on vellum. Machinery near the radius began to suffer sympathetic failures, cogwheels seizing, sensors reading void where matter existed, servitors reciting snatches of catechism backward before choking on their own tongues. He plotted the scatter and saw the pattern it made only by refusing the first pattern the mind suggested. 3 lines, intersecting, the same malformed sigil. Only now, the lines were streets. He set a small camera skull to hover, its optics blessed, and sent it to the cathedral's perimeter. It returned 5 minutes later with its lenses fogged from within. The recorded image went black at the threshold. Over the blank, the audio stream caught a voice not unlike the relays, but closer, more intimate, as if it were speaking directly into the small cathedral of the ear. "Obedience is purity," it said, and the skull's power cell cracked like an egg. On the palace channel, pirated into his console through methods he promised the Omnissiah he would never use, Callus saw the governor in a smaller room. No banners, no dais. She sat at a table with her hands flat, as if fearing they might do something treasonous if allowed. Across from her, shadow. A shadow that moved like a patient animal. "Your compliance honors Terra," the shadow breathed, and something about the way the syllables touched each other made Callus turn off the sound. Even loyalty must be guarded from itself. Lauren lasted until the 6th night. Hunger scratched the inside of his ribs. Sleep came in thin slices, slick with panic. On that night, the ash rain returned, heavier, tapping the hab windows like gloved fingers. He heard the collectors 2 floors down, their rods purring,
their tone the soft certainty of carpenters measuring wood for a coffin. When their steps reached his landing, he stood beside the door with both hands open and said, "I am loyal," because he believed that if he chose the right words, the lock would hold. The footsteps paused. A breath traveled through the seam of the door, warm and chemical sweet. The rods made their small sound. The scene glowed, dull red.
When the door slid back, it was not the cloaked silhouettes he had imagined, but a single figure in matte carapace, visor down, rebreather whispering. The rosette hung at the throat like a small eclipse. "Lauren Vex," the figure said, voice filtered into something sexless and bureaucratic. "You are required for audit." He should have followed it once. That was the rule and the prayer both. Instead, some stubborn clerk's habit made him lift his chin. "By whose writ?" he asked, because pattern demanded a seal, a signature, a chain of custody. The figure did not show a parchment or a slate. The figure turned slightly, and in the reflection of the visor he saw his own face. Behind it, he saw the 3 intersecting lines blooming across the glass as if drawn by an invisible hand. "By silence," the voice said. Lauren stepped into the corridor and felt the city listen. They led him downward, the corridors twisted away from their known geometry, corners turning sharper than angles should allow. Pipes bled warmth into the air, and the scent of ozone and sanctified oil pressed against his tongue. The inquisitorial escort, if that word still had meaning, never looked back. Their steps made no echo, only the steady brush of ash on stone. When they reached the first junction, the lumen strips above them dimmed to a copper pulse. Lauren realized the light was following the rhythm of his heartbeat. When it slowed in panic, so did the glow. They passed through a gate carved with the imperial aquila, its wings scorched. Beyond it stretched a stair that descended past the hab foundations and manufactorum lines into the planet's subspires. Here, the sound of the city faded, replaced by a low, breathing vibration. He had felt it before in the machinery, now it was in the air, in the bones. The figure ahead halted at a sealed bulkhead, stamped with a serial he recognized from administratum architecture. Vault IX, Reliquary, Cathedrum District, the same code that had marked St. Althrax's undercrypt. Without a word, the inquisitorial figure placed a palm on the seal. It opened inward like soft metal. The room beyond was not a vault. It was a chamber of glass cylinders, each taller than a man, filled with pale liquid. Shapes drifted inside, humanoid, hairless, the cords of their necks plugged into thick tubes. Their eyes fluttered behind translucent lids. A faint chorus filled the space. The sound of overlapping prayers played backward. On a raised dais stood a console identical to those of the administratum Vox banks. He could have operated it himself. The figure gestured. "Speak," it said. He didn't understand. To what? "To him," the figure replied, and pressed a stud on the console. The tubes brightened. The liquid within each cylinder trembled as if breathing faster. One of the sleepers twitched, fingers splaying like a supplicant's. Static filled his ears, rising to a pitch that drilled behind his eyes. In it, a voice, no, 1,000, spoke his name. "Lauren Vex, clerk of Velis Magna. You have carried the ledger of faith. Record what you witness." He stumbled back, shaking his head. This isn't sanctioned. I'm just a clerk." The Inquisitor turned slightly. "You are function. Function is purpose." The static solidified into words. "The Emperor's gaze withdraws from corruption. Therefore, corruption becomes invisible. This world is invisible." He saw then that the sleepers were not dead. Their mouths moved in slow unison, shaping syllables of a prayer older than Gothic. Each time they exhaled, the lumen strips dimmed. Each inhalation drew light back into being. The Inquisition was not erasing Velis Magna out of wrath. It was feeding it to something larger, something that required silence as tithe. The realization broke him open. His breath came in quick, wet gasps. You're not saving the world. You're unmaking it. The visor turned toward him, expressionless. Purity is subtraction. Then came the tremor. Far above, the Manufactoria screamed, a long metallic roar, as if the planet itself were being riven. The Inquisitor looked upward, head cocked. Designation complete, it murmured. Ordo Hereticus sequence confirmed. Proceed to excision. The cylinders shattered one by one, spilling their luminous contents across the floor. The liquid hissed where it touched the metal, eating small, perfect holes. The sleepers convulsed and fell, their skin already turning the color of ash. The voice in the static spoke once more, quieter now, as if receding. Witness ends. Record ends. Velis Magna ends. The Inquisitor stepped past him toward the stair. Lauren reached out, desperate, fingers catching the edge of the figure's cloak. It turned. For the first time, he saw its face beneath the visor. There was none. Only smooth ceramite, molded into the suggestion of features, and behind it, a faint light, like molten glass. "Why me?" he asked. "You kept the silence, and silence keeps its own." It left him there, surrounded by dying light. He didn't run. There was nowhere left to go. The hum deepened into a single sustained note, and for a moment he could hear every name on the planet being spoken in unison. Then erased.
In the upper spires, the sky tore open. Great pillars of black fire descended, wrapping the city in a cocoon of shadow. To those few who still lived to see it, it looked as if the stars themselves had knelt in judgment. The black ships had begun their work. In the Manufactorium, Callus watched his monitors fill with red runes. The dead zone had expanded to encompass the entire grid. When he attempted to override the shutdown, his mechanical limbs locked in place, bound by an external command. His last thought before the systems claimed him was oddly human, that even machines could be made to pray. The cathedral imploded in silence. The sound reached the palace as a single low pulse. Dame Verena Cord fell to her knees before the shattered Aquila, mouthing words she no longer remembered. From her balcony, she saw the black ships moving closer, their engines burning with golden fire. It was beautiful, she thought, terrible and perfect. Then the fire touched the palace, and beauty became light. Down below, in the ruins of Vault IX Reliquary, Lauren Vex sat beside the broken cylinders, his reflection trembling in the pooling luminescence. He picked up a fragment of data slate from the console, its edge still warm. He began to write, not with words but with the memory of them, pressing patterns into the dust. The noise outside faded into something distant, almost peaceful. When the silence finally came, it was total. The silence was not empty. It was alive. It breathed through the wreckage like a pulse, steady and slow, the kind of rhythm you only hear when your heart starts to forget its own beat. The air was thick with radiant ash. Every inhalation felt like swallowing glass. Lauren Vex sat amid the smoldering ruins of the reliquary and watched the light bleed from the broken tubes. It flowed across the floor in slender veins, converging toward a single crack where the stone still glowed faintly from the heat of judgment. It was then he realized the light was not fading, it was retreating, drawn downward, as if the planet itself were drinking it. He rose on trembling legs, hands streaked with soot and luminescent residue. Around him, fragments of the sleepers lay still,
bodies that were no longer quite human. Their flesh had crystallized into something glassy and brittle, their faces caught between agony and devotion. One had its mouth open in a silent scream, and through the translucent skin Lauren could see letters burned into the bone. They were not Gothic. They pulsed faintly, like embers waiting for air. He turned away before he could read them. The Inquisitor had gone. The black ships above were descending now, slow as morning. Their shadows moved through the city like the hands of a clock counting backward. Lauren staggered into the corridor, the air trembling with low-frequency sound. As he climbed the stair, he could feel the vibrations deepen, pressing against his skull, rearranging thought into something hollow. When he emerged into the subspires, there was no light left, only the faint red glow of promethium fires dying in the distance. The streets were empty, yet the world was not quiet. Somewhere deep within the manufactoria, servitors continued their endless hymns to the machine god. Their voices cracked and uneven. They recited litanies of purity even as the words melted into static. The hive spires that once reached toward the stars now bowed inward, their tips curving as if in supplication. Lauren moved through the ash like a ghost, past burned-out halves and glassed statues of saints whose eyes had melted from their sockets.
He found himself drawn to the cathedral, or what remained of it. The entire structure had collapsed inward, its towers reduced to a single mound of black stone. At its center, where the altar once stood, there was a hole. Not a crater, not an explosion's mark, but a perfect circle that fell away into nothing. A quiet wind rose from it, carrying with it the faint sound of chanting. Kneeling at the edge was Callus 79. Half his body was gone, stripped to polished steel and frayed cables. His one organic eye turned toward Loran, flickering between life and code. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice filtered through layers of distortion. "I don't know where else to go," Loran answered. Callus tried to speak again, but the augmetic components in his jaw twitched and locked. Sparks flared between his teeth. "They said purity through subtraction, but subtraction leaves remainder." His head tilted, motion jerky, like a machine losing sync. "We are remainder." Loran wanted to deny it, to find words that still meant something. Instead, he looked down into the pit. The chanting grew louder, and beneath it he could hear something like a heartbeat, slow, immense, mechanical. Each pulse sent ripples through the ash around the hole. He leaned closer and saw faint movement far below, shapes turning in the dark, vast and deliberate. "What is it?" he whispered. Callus's single eye dimmed. "End or beginning, code or prayer, they are the same now." Loran felt the wind from the pit grow stronger. It carried with it fragments of voices, the same static chorus from the reliquary, but now clearer, layered with human tones. He recognized his own name among them, repeated in cadence, a syllable of some larger invocation. The black ships were almost upon them, their engines burned with the radiance of falling suns. The pit erupted in light. Not the white brilliance of promethium fire, but something deeper. Gold shot through with veins of black. It rose in a column, silent and perfect, carrying with it the weight of 1,000 souls. For a moment, the entire hive seemed to breathe again. The melted aquillas reformed in the air, made of dust and memory, wings unfurling before dissolving once more. The chanting stopped. When the light receded, nothing remained. The pit was gone, filled as if it had never been. The cathedral's rubble had vanished too, replaced with smooth, featureless stone. Callus was no longer beside him. Only his shadow lingered, etched into the ground like a relic of an explosion that never happened. Loran sank to his knees. Above, the black ships began to turn away. They did not fire again. Their work was complete. He understood then
what the Inquisition had meant by purity through subtraction. Velis Magna had not been destroyed, it had been unmade, folded back into the void that birthed it. Every sin, every word, every breath had been written out of history. The Emperor's gaze had not withdrawn, it had blinked, and in that blink, the world had ceased to exist. A wind rose, carrying the last threads of ash toward the empty horizon. Lauren closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, though he no longer knew to whom he spoke. The words tasted of iron and loss. When he opened his eyes again, the city was gone. He stood on an endless plain of glass, the stars reflected beneath his feet. Somewhere far away, a voice spoke, not to him, but through him. Silence complete, transmission archived. And then there was only the hum of the void, steady and eternal. When the Inquisition comes, it does not come like an army. It comes like a thought, a small, silent truth that spreads faster than flame and kills more surely than any bolter shell. Before the ships descend, before the banners are torn away, there is only stillness, the kind that makes you realize the air itself has been listening. The black ships drifted above Velis Magna like vast mausoleums, their hulls carved with sigils of warding and invocation. They did not orbit, they hovered, motionless, as though gravity had consented to hold its breath. Their presence did not fill the sky, it erased it. And beneath that erasure, the planet waited. Those who still lived could feel the silence inside their bones, like pressure before a storm. From orbit, the Inquisition observed. Countless auger arrays and auspex lenses swept across the hive world, peeling away atmosphere and architecture in search of thought, of deviation, of unsanctioned memory. What they saw was not rebellion. It was absence, an entire planet gone dim in the psychic spectrum, like a candle that had drowned in its own wax. The Ordo Hereticus called it condition null, and condition null demanded cleansing. The first to be taken were the astropaths. Their choir towers went dark within the hour. Every transmission attempted to Terra, to nearby systems, to the Segmentum command, returned only a sound that none could interpret. It was not static, nor words, nor interference. It was a rhythm, steady as breath, soft as prayer. Some said it was the Emperor's own heartbeat. Others said it was the world itself trying to whisper forgiveness. Whatever it was, the Inquisition heard it too. Inquisitor Rhea Voss stood in the observation chamber of her flagship, Peregrine of St. Dexos. Her armor was dark gold, chased with scripture, the imperial aquila engraved across her chestplate in lines so fine they seemed to move when the lumen struck them. Her face was pale, unscarred, the kind of stillness only years of sanctioned brutality could grant. Around her, servitors recited fragments of litany as data streamed across their hollowed skulls. "Confirmation?" she asked, her voice low but absolute. "Confirmed, Inquisitor," replied her adjutant, Interrogator Kale Dravik, his head bowed. "All Vox signals silent, no loyal communication. All patterns show deviation from doctrinal rhythm."
Rhea's eyes lingered on the data slate hovering before her, lines of code scrolled like falling ash. The symbol, 3 intersecting lines, appeared between transmissions, fractalizing with each repetition. And the Mechanicus oversight? Neutralized. Magos pattern unresponsive. Machine prayers corrupted.
She inhaled through the rebreather built into her gorget. So it spreads even to the blessed circuitry? That is not heresy alone. That is contagion. Kyle hesitated. Shall I initiate planetary quarantine? Not yet. She turned, eyes like molten glass. A world may be saved even after its voice fails. We must first hear what silence is trying to say. It was not rhetoric. Reavas was of the Ordo Hereticus, yes, but her initiation had been under the Ordo Sicarius, trained to recognize when silence meant surrender and when it meant trap. Velus Magnus' quiet was too complete. It was not rebellion, it was invitation. She ordered a ground descent. 3 landers pierced the atmosphere, each carrying detachments of stormtroopers and sanctioned psychers wrapped in layers of null field insulation. The descent through the smog took hours. The air shimmered with static discharge, and the sky burned red where it met the ship hulls. As the landing struts touched what was left of the hive, the Vox burst to life for the first time since orbit. It was not a transmission. It was a scream. The sound did not come from a living throat. It was mechanical, raw, a choir of Vox grills pushed beyond endurance. The psychers in the first lander convulsed instantly, blood seeping from their eyes and nostrils. Their bindings glowed white-hot. Rhea felt it through the ship's reinforced plating, a vibration that was not sound, but will. Something wanted to be heard. She gave the order to continue descent. The stormtroopers moved in formation, rifles raised, eyes scanning the ruins that had once been the hive's upper spires. The buildings leaned like supplicants, their surfaces pocked with symbols, half melted into glass. The air shimmered with heat, though the fires had long burned out. Every step echoed as if the stone remembered being whole. Rhea descended last, her boots touching ash that still radiated faint warmth. Around her, the stormtroopers formed a perimeter. Kyle followed close behind, his eyes darting to the horizon where the Manufactorum towers curved like broken fingers. "This place is wrong," he muttered. "I can't hear anything, not even the wind." Silence is the first mercy. Listen deeper.
They moved through the ruins until they reached what had once been St. Althrax's cathedrum. The structure was gone, replaced by smooth, unmarked stone, not rubble, erasure. Even the dust avoided the area, as though repelled by memory. Rhea knelt, tracing the surface with her gauntlet. The metal hissed faintly on contact. "Residual warp signature?" Kale asked. She nodded, but faint, more like the echo of something that refused to exist. A flicker of light caught her attention, a data slate, half buried in the ash, still active. She picked it up. The device was cracked, its screen veined with fractures, yet the text upon it scrolled without power source or logic. One name repeated endlessly: Lauren Vex. "Survivor?" Kale asked. "Record," Rhea corrected. "The planet's last memory." She gestured, and a servitor extended a mechadendrite to interface with the device. The data stream that poured forth was fragmented, filled with voice imprints and static overlays. But beneath it, a single phrase repeated in perfect rhythm: "The light of Terra has withdrawn its gaze." Rhea stood slowly. She said, "They knew. They knew the Emperor had turned away from them, and still they waited for his forgiveness." Kale swallowed hard. "Then what are we waiting for?" She looked toward the horizon. The black ships hung motionless above, their presence pressing down like judgment incarnate. "For proof," she said, "that there is anything left to judge." Behind her, one of the psychers stirred. Though his restraints had melted, his body still lived, barely. He turned his blind eyes toward Rhea and spoke in a voice that was not his own. "You cannot cleanse silence. You can only join it." Then his head burst open in a spray of white fire, and the world went still again. Rhea didn't flinch. She said, "Mark the coordinates. This is where we begin." And so the cleansing of Velis Magna began, not with fire, but with listening. The stairs beyond led downward at an angle too gentle to be industrial and too deliberate to be accidental. The air changed, abandoning the ash-sweet bite for a taste like copper and old incense. Stormtroopers moved first, each step measured, muzzles tracking the dark as if it could rearrange itself between blinks. Rhea followed, Kale at her shoulder, his data slate whispering catalogs of absence. The silence pressed around them like velvet soaked in cold water. It shaped itself to their armor and took the outline of their thoughts. They emerged into a chamber that had never existed on any plan. A low, long nave of stone and glass where cylinders once stood in neat ranks. Their bases remained, ringed with channels that glimmered with a residue like the sheen on dying coals. A broken console waited upon a dais, its surface spidered with fractures, its lumen dead. Rhea touched a finger to the cracks and felt the faintest tremor, a subsong in the stone, as if some machine far below the hive were reciting a catechism in its sleep. "Choir vessels," Kale said quietly, circling a dry ring where liquid had once pooled. But not astropathic, something cruder, no sanction marks, no mechanica sigils. Not crude, purposeful. Someone built this without asking leave from any order that would have told them no. She studied the dais again. In the dust lay marks drawn by a hand that did not have time left for neatness, patterns of straight strokes and tight curves pressed into the ash with some clipped edge. No letters, ledger habits. She recognized them from interrogation cells on other, better worlds, the shorthand of a mind that cannot stop recording even as the world ends. She read the rhythm rather than the sign. It spoke in audits and cuts, in columns balanced not by numbers, but by the subtraction of breath. Kale crouched near the nearest plinth and ran a probe along its rim. The readings wavered, then dropped into stasis. "Residual psychic imprint," he said. "Diffuse, like the wake of a large ship long after it is past." A stormtrooper on the perimeter cleared her throat over the vox. "Movement, Inquisitor. North quadrant." They pivoted as one. The movement was not a thing, but the suggestion of a thing, an eddy in air where the eye longs to place a shape. From it, uncoiled a voice as thin as the last thread on a frayed rope. "You came late," it said, and the words seemed to assemble themselves from the chamber rather than travel through it. "Identify," Rhea said, letting the rosette hang visible in case anything inside the voice remembered symbols. "Function, record," the voice answered, patient as an intake clerk at the end of a long line. "Designation, Lauren Vex." Kale's eyes flicked to the cracked slate in Rhea's hand. She did not look away from the air. "You are alive." "Remainder," said the voice, and the word fell into the chamber like a coin dropped down a well. She took one step forward, boots scratching faintly. "Tell me what was done here." The pause tasted of iron. A tithe, of sound, of witness. We were not burned, we were weighed. Our words were removed until the balance held. "Who held the scales?"
"Silence," he said, and there was something like awe in it, or exhaustion refined into faith. Lightning crawled along the ceiling stone, no light, only the sensation along the skin that precedes a storm. Kayal glanced up, then back to his auspex. The screen fogged from the inside. "Inquisitor," he murmured, "we are inside a pressure that does not belong to weather." Rhea tasted the same pressure, the way it rounded the edges of thoughts, smoothed questions into acceptance. She locked her jaw until her teeth clicked and memory returned like a blade. "Lauren Vex," she said, "what called the black ships?" Condition null, the voice replied, affectionate toward the bureaucracy even now. Deviation beyond signal. Petition denied. Audit assigned. Purity by subtraction. A hush, like a page turned. We tried to speak correctly. We damaged the grammar of the world. One of the stormtroopers stepped too close to a plinth and flinched as her gauntlet smoked. The metal beneath her hand looked unchanged, but smelled faintly of lilies and hot copper. She withdrew, breath hard inside her helmet. Sanctioned hazard, Kale warned into the squad box, and the line tightened. Rhea knelt beside the ash-scratched marks again. She could see the hasty series where a hand had started to draw the Aquila and then changed its mind, dividing the wings into 3 strokes that met not in the Emperor's sternum, but in an offset knot. The malformed sigil, it was everywhere in this story, between signals, inside prayers, laid over streets. Lauren, she said, did you see who carried it? I saw a rosette that showed no face. I asked for writ. It said silence. I wrote until there was nothing left to write with. Did they speak of Terra? They spoke like rooms do, he said, and something in Kael's expression collapsed into a small private sorrow. They spoke like doors that lock you for your own good. Rhea stood. The chamber's sub-song was louder now, the sleeping machine below turning onto its other side. She could feel a decision thickening in the air the way resin thickens in a wound. The cleansing could begin. Fire would be kinder than this patient erasure. And yet the old training whispered a different litany. Proof precedes flame. Her gaze slid to the seam through which they had entered. It had begun to close. Extraction, now. Stormtroopers moved with the economy of those who have lived too long on the edge of holes. Kael stayed a heartbeat too long, fingers resting on the cracked slate as if it were a dying hand. Kalen, he said softly, do you want to be remembered? The air shifted. I want to be accurate. Kael swallowed, then tucked the slate into a pouch near his ribs and turned. The seam narrowed as they approached, meeting itself with the hushed finality of parchment burned to its last corner. They slipped through single file. Rhea was last, her armor brushing stone that felt colder than vacuum.
They were back in the stair, the silence now a pressure behind them rather than around. Up in the ruin light, Ash moved again, lines whispering along the ground toward the sealed nave like water seeking a drain. The world was tidying itself. Kale exhaled through his teeth. It's doing it to us while we watch. No, Rhea said, and let the denial be a weapon. We are watching while it does it. That is not the same. Above, the sky shifted. The black ships, which had been motionless for days, angled a fraction, their prows tilting as if scenting a change. Vox chimes rang in Rhea's gorget, crisp and ritual. A bridge officer spoke from far orbit, voice formal with the weight of tablets and seals. Inquisitor Rhea Voss, orbital augurs register reconfiguration in sub-spire strata. Condition null advancing. Fire mission authorized upon your confirmation. Kale looked to her, eyes raw now, the kind a man gets when truth has scraped the inside of his thoughts. If we burn it, we fix it in the only history it has left. If we don't, it writes itself away. Rhea lifted her head. The ash tasted of old parchment and the copper of blood that had forgotten its veins. She thought of her first sanctioning, the oath spoken into a bowl of salt and iron, the way the words had cut her tongue and turned her mouth into a reliquary. She thought of Lauren Vex, who wanted to be accurate when accuracy had no more paper to live on. Hold fire, she said. Mark a perimeter. Prepare a choir. We will ask the silence one more question. She turned back toward the seam that was no longer there and placed her gauntlet on the stone that remembered being a door. It was not prayer, it was a demand phrased like a litany.
Velis magna, she said, as if a world could be addressed like a witness.
What do you become when you defy judgment and ask to be forgotten? The stone did not open. The air answered. A wind rose that had no source and carried no dust. It pushed against their armor and passed through the cracks in their rosettes. Somewhere below, something enormous inhaled. The wind thickened until it became substance. It pressed against armor seals and slid under the tongues of helmets, tasting of dust and anise and the faint sweetness of burnt propellant. Vox channels hissed with feedback, every frequency bleeding into every other until words dissolved. The stormtroopers closed ranks by instinct, the discipline of 1,000 drills against things that could not be seen. Rearranged one gauntlet, and the line froze. The world exhaled. From the air itself came the sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, multiplied until it became the rhythm of an entire city drawing one shared, weary breath. Then the tone changed. The breathing folded into chant. The words had no vowels, only the scrape of consonants and the hum of teeth against bone. Kale staggered. The auspex at his wrist spun, its needle circling without direction. "It's not sound," he gasped. "It's mapping our pulse, modulating against it." Rhea cut him off. Mute channels. All of them.
One by one, the stormtroopers sealed their comms. The chant dimmed but did not end. It lived now in the metal around them, in the bones beneath the soil. Rhea felt it prying at her certainty like a cold thumb against the hinge of thought. Proof precedes flame, she reminded herself, but the phrase felt brittle, like scripture recited without belief. A ripple passed through the ash at their feet, widening into circles. The ground beneath them began to shift, not cracking, not breaking, moving, like skin adjusting to a deeper muscle. From the ash rose shapes, silhouettes half-formed, as though the world were remembering the people it had erased. Faces, shoulders, hands clasped in endless devotion, each formed from gray dust and held by breath alone. The figures opened their mouths. Silence poured out. Not the absence of noise, but an active, hungry quiet that devoured the hum of the power packs and the click of weapon triggers. It reached the stormtroopers first. The nearest soldier froze mid-step, the vox light in his helm flickering once before extinguishing. Another dropped to one knee, rifle slipping from limp fingers. Kal reached for his rosary ring, whispering a litany of warding, and the beads dissolved into powder in his palm. Rhea drew her bolt pistol and fired once. The round entered one of the figures and vanished. No impact, no smoke. The form simply absorbed the motion and stood unchanged. Spectral resonance, she asked, voice taut. Kal shook his head. No, memory residue. The planet's rewriting itself using what it remembers of human form. Then it remembers wrong. She activated her Auspex seal and transmitted a short encrypted burst to orbit. Just coordinates, nothing more. Above them, the black ships adjusted, their engines dimming to a funeral glow. The dust figures turned toward Rhea. One raised a hand, finger extended as if to trace the edge of her rosette. For an instant, she thought she saw its face. Male, narrow, eyes hollow but kind. "Laron Vex," she breathed. Kal looked up sharply. "Inquisitor?" But the figure was already breaking apart, ash unraveling in the wind, leaving behind the faint echo of a voice that said simply, "Accurate." The chant stopped. The silence changed direction, flowing outward now, away from the cathedral ruins, spreading across the hive like a slow tide. Vox channels cleared, the Auspex needle steadied, the figures crumbled into the dust they had always been. Kal leaned against a fallen column, sweat streaking the soot on his face. "It let us go." "No," Rhea said, eye still on the horizon where the silence moved. "It forgot us." For a long moment, neither spoke. The world felt lighter, as if the weight of judgment had lifted, but that lightness had the wrong flavor. Relief built on absence, not grace. Rhea keyed her comm. "This is Inquisitor Voss to orbital command. Condition null confirmed. Execute protocol Mournfire. Begin at perimeter 1 and sweep inward. Burn until the silence stops moving."
Their response came after a long pause. Understood, Inquisitor. By the Emperor's will. She looked once more at the stone where the seam had been. There was no sign of door or passage, only smooth surface, clean as if newly forged. She holstered her pistol, the motion slow, deliberate, final. There will be no relics, she said. No reports beyond the necessary. The name Velis Magna is stricken. It joins the others in the archive of absence. Call's gaze followed the rising dust as orbital fire began to bloom at the horizon, silent flashes painting the sky red. And if silence isn't finished with us? Rhea turned toward the light, expression unreadable. Then the Emperor will learn what silence has to say. The ground shook as the first column of purifying flame descended, molten light swallowing the ruins in a tide of glass. Through the tremor and heat, Rhea felt the faintest vibration at the edge of hearing, the ghost of a heartbeat, slow and even, as though the world itself was exhaling one last time. Above, the black ships drifted, engines dim, watching with the patience of monuments. And when the fire passed, nothing moved but the wind. There are many kinds of fire in the Imperium of Man. The Prometheum flame that feeds the machines of war. The purifying flame of the ecclesiarchy that burns sin from flesh. The cold, white fire of exterminatus, which erases even the memory of defiance. But the fire that came to Velis Magna was something else entirely. Neither heat nor light, but judgment given form. It did not consume, it rewrote. The bombardment began as a whisper in the upper atmosphere, a slow gathering of pressure and radiant energy. From orbit, the peregrine of St. Daxos held its station, engines humming in ritual rhythm. Inquisitor Rhea Voss watched from the forward observation deck as the void dark side of Velis Magna began to glow. Thin lines of gold traced the contours of the planet, like veins under skin. Each was a burn line from an orbital lance, drawn with surgical precision by the servitors of the fleet. There was no explosion, no thunder, only light. Controlled, deliberate, divine. Karl Dravik stood behind her, face half-lit by the reflection of the dying world. Purity by subtraction, he murmured, repeating the phrase they'd heard below. It's beautiful. Terrifying, but beautiful. Rhea didn't respond. She had seen many cleansings, worlds that had screamed as they died, oceans boiled into steam, continents shattering under bombardment, but never one that died quietly. Velis Magna made no sound, no psychic cry, no signal of pain. It simply let go. As each beam struck, the surface of the planet folded in on itself, cooling almost instantly, leaving glass plains where once there had been hive towers.
He nodded slowly, but the words didn't satisfy him. Doubt. He could understand that. Doubt had texture, reason, consequence. But silence. Silence seemed too human a sin to merit this scale of obliteration. On the planetary surface, those who had hidden from the bombardment's first wave were now greeted by the second. In the ruins of the Manufactorum, the survivors, Mechanicus adepts, half-mad priests, and servitors rumming on ghost protocols, felt the sky vibrate. There was no warning, no siren. The light simply arrived. One of them, a young adept named Alara Voss, crawled from beneath a collapsed pipeway and stared up through the cracks in the ceiling. The clouds burned white, outlines of ships visible through the haze. She had spent her entire life building machines she would never see, whispering praise to the Omnissiah through the static of her respirator. Now the sky itself looked like a forge. Around her, the other adepts huddled in shadow, their faces lit by the reflections of their own destruction. Someone began reciting the canticle of transmission, half prayer, half report, to no one in particular. The words dissolved under the heat. Alara found herself whispering not to the machine god, but to the Emperor.
We didn't mean defiance. We only wanted to be heard. The roof gave way. Back aboard the Peregrine, Rhea turned from the viewport. "Mark phase completion," she said. "Initiate ground confirmation sweeps." Kale hesitated. "Inquisitor, there will be nothing left to sweep." Her gaze was calm, unyielding. "Then the sweep will confirm that." He nodded and moved to the console, fingers tracing across the rune keys. The ship shuddered as smaller landers detached, descending through the ash clouds like drops of black ink falling into milk. Each carried servitors equipped with auspex arrays and sensor probes to read what remained. Minutes passed. The Vox crackled with static before a filtered voice came through. Thin, metallic, echoing with distortion. "Ground Team 2 to command. Reading anomalous patterns in glass strata. Not residual heat. Structured energy. The planet's crust is conducting thought." Kay looked up sharply. "That's impossible." Rhea's eyes narrowed. "Define structured." "Pulse intervals, rhythmic, almost like breath." The connection cut out.
Kale's hands trembled slightly. "That's the same pattern the Psychers heard when we first arrived." "Yes," Rhea said quietly, "the heartbeat." Another signal came through, this time unbidden. It wasn't from the ground teams. It wasn't even from orbit. It was the same frequency that had plagued the astropaths before their deaths. A vibration too low for instruments, too high for reason. The ship's lumen panels flickered in sympathy, casting the chamber in alternating bands of light and darkness. From the deck below, servitors began to scream. Not in pain, they weren't capable of that, but in perfect synchronization, as if some unseen hand had found their vocal circuits and pressed down hard. The sound rose, spiraling into tones that no human throat could form. Kale pressed his palms over his ears. "Inquisitor, we're receiving Vox contamination. Orders?" Rhea didn't answer immediately. She was staring into the void, where Velis Magna's surface pulsed faintly, one last rhythm in the aftermath of cleansing. "It's not contamination, it's persistence," she said finally. "You mean it's still alive?" "I mean it refuses to end." A klaxon blared. Data streams erupted across the control panels, dozens of identical readings flashing in red. Psychic feedback loop detected. Source, planetary core. Rhea felt her throat tighten. "Disengage bombardment. Pull us back to high orbit." The helmsman's voice crackled through the Vox. "Negative response, Inquisitor. The engines are—" Static swallowed the rest. The Peregrine began to drift. The ship's void shields flickered, not from impact but from interference. Kale ran to the nearest terminal, his hands moving automatically, trying to wrest control back from the ship's subsystems. The code resisted, lines of Gothic script rewriting themselves in real time, replacing commands with fragments of prayers. "The Emperor withdraws. The Emperor observes. The Emperor forgets." "Voss, the planet's inside our systems," Kale said, voice shaking. "No, it's remembering us." The void outside glowed faintly gold. Velis Magna pulsed again, and the silence began to speak. The voice did not come through sound. It came through the hull, through the bones of the ship, through the marrow of every living thing aboard the Peregrine of St. Daxos. It began as a vibration, a low note that resonated in the spaces between cells, then slowly took shape. It was neither male nor female, neither human nor machine. It spoke in the tone of something ancient, something that had once been human but had long since outgrown the need for lungs, words, or mercy. Rhea gripped the edge of the command lectern as the deck beneath her feet trembled. The lumen panels strobed faster, the rhythm eerily identical to the psychic pulse from the planet below. The voice was everywhere, inside her mind, her armor, her heartbeat. "You came to silence us," it said. "Now you are within our silence. Kale staggered, his eyes wide and unfocused. Inquisitor, I can feel it, like it's in my blood. Every thought I have, it's answering. Hold the line, Rhea ordered, her voice a taut whisper. Do not let it find your shape. But the voice was already finding them. Across the ship, servitors twitched in their restraining frames, the metallic limbs contorting in unison. Some began to sing, but not in any human tongue, long, warbling tones that harmonized with the vibration emanating from the planet below. The sound grew until it filled every chamber of the ship like the Te Deum of the damned. Kale's console burst into life. The runes no longer displayed warnings or data. Instead, they showed images, faces of the dead from Velis Magna, flickering like lanterns underwater. Men, women, children, their eyes empty but glowing faintly with that same golden light. Each time Kale blinked, a new face appeared, and every single one was mouthing the same phrase. We are remainder. He looked to Rhea. It's them. Every soul the fire erased. They're in the machine now. They're thinking. Impossible, she hissed, though her voice lacked conviction. He slammed his fist against the console. You saw the structured energy signatures. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was data. They coded themselves into the glass, into the crust, into every circuit that touched their world. The bombardment didn't kill them, it uploaded them. Rhea turned toward the viewport. The planet below was no longer just glowing, it was pulsing. Light shimmered beneath the crust, spreading outward like veins of molten gold. The shape of the hive towers reappeared, not physically, but as patterns of illumination across the surface, precise and deliberate, like neurons firing in a brain. They've become the planet, Kale said softly. Every thought, every prayer, every death scream, it's all memory. The Inquisition didn't cleanse them, it archived them. Rhea's voice dropped to a whisper. A world of data and prayer? Kale nodded, trembling. A machine saint, a self-writing scripture.
Rhea's jaw tightened. Or a heresy beyond name. She reached for the command seals at her chest plate, unlocking the inquisitorial failsafe. A direct communion link to the Golden Edict, the orbital command hub stationed 5 systems away. Through that link, she could issue one order, Exterminatus Ultima, the complete annihilation of a celestial body, leaving no chance of persistence, physical or psychic. But as her fingers brushed the rune, the vox flickered again. This time, the voice that answered was not from the planet. It was her own voice. Rhea Voss, it said, calm, precise. Authorization sequence acknowledged. You seek to erase what you cannot understand. You forget that understanding was the Emperor's first sin. Her breath froze. What? Kale looked up from his console, pale as wax. Inquisitor, it's mimicking you. No, she said, her words hollow. It's reading me. The planet's glow intensified. The pulses aligned perfectly with the ship's heartbeat monitors, its reactor rhythm, even the flicker of Kale's eyes. Every cycle synchronized until the peregrine itself became an extension of the same living network. The bridge crew knelt, not from devotion, but from failure of will. Rhea forced her breathing steady. If it has remembered me, then I will remind it of what it fears. She tore the rosette from her armor and placed it against the deck. The symbol flared with searing white light, cutting through the gold pulse. She began to recite the benediction of obliteration, each line a blade, each syllable a strike. In the Emperor's gaze there is no shadow. In the Emperor's will there is no silence. In the Emperor's name I unmake what is unholy. The light expanded, spilling across the bridge like molten glass.
Kale cried out as his consoles overloaded, sparks showering from every surface. For a brief, blinding instant, the vibration stopped. Then came the sound, an echoing tone that split the air like a cry of rage. The golden glow on the planet flickered, rippled, then converged toward one point deep within the crust. The heartbeat returned, faster now, urgent. Kale's readings spiked. Inquisitor, you've provoked it. It's collapsing. Everything's folding into the core.
Good, Rhea said. Then we finish what we started. But as she spoke, the ship shuddered violently. From the lower decks came the hollow clang of impact. The crew scrambled, shouting through failing vox links. One of the servitors exploded, spraying fragments of bone and steel across the floor. Kale checked his readouts. Something's rising from the surface, massive metallic signatures, 12, maybe 13 constructs, lifting from the glass. Rhea looked through the viewport. Emerging from the molten plains were colossal figures, towering shapes of gold and obsidian, faceless and perfect. Each bore the faint outline of the Imperial Aquila, but the wings were twisted, curved inward like claws. They moved with impossible grace, walking across molten fields as though on air. Kale whispered, "By the throne, are those custodians?" Rhea's eyes narrowed. No, they only look like them. The constructs lifted their arms, energy gathered in their palms, burning white-hot. The Auspex screamed warnings. Rhea closed her fist over the rosette and shouted into the vox, "All batteries, fire at will!" The Peregrine's lances ignited, streaks of blue and white fire cutting through the void. The beam struck the figures directly, yet the light bent, absorbed, redirected. Each construct turned its gaze toward the ship, their eyes glowing with the same golden hue that had haunted the planet. Kale's voice trembled. "They're not attacking, they're mirroring us." Rhea stared at the nearest figure. Its armor shimmered like liquid light, and in its reflection, she saw her own face, twinned, distorted, and speaking before she did. "You are the flame that teaches silence to exist," it said, "and for that, you are sacred." The ship trembled again, alarms blaring, the scars themselves dimming around the dying world. Rhea did not blink. The construct advanced with the stately certainty of cathedrals walking, their steps leaving no wake in the molten plain below. Their palms shone like opened reliquaries, each light a perfect circle with a darkness at its center, as if every radiance were the memory of an eclipse. The Peregrine heaved to starboard, under emergency thrusters. The void shields flared, guttered, and steadied, their edges fraying like parchment held too close to a candle. On the bridge, incense coils snapped and spat resin. Kale's mouth moved through a dozen litanies before one found purchase on his voice. "They're phasing on our output," he said, his eyes a feverish gloss. "Each strike we make becomes a rehearsal they perform better the next time."
"Then we stop teaching," Rhea said, and shut down the forward batteries with a gesture that felt like cutting her own hand. The ship's guns fell silent. In the quiet, the gold pulse from the planet steadied, as if soothed. The constructs halted and turned their empty faces toward one another, exchanging nothing and everything. A change rippled through their lines, a minute folding at the chest plate where a true Aquila would spread its wings. The false birds bent inward, as if preparing to drink. Kale swallowed. "If they're not weapons, what are they?" "Votives," Rhea said. "Icons hammered out of residue. Shapes the world believes will save it." Her gauntlet tightened around the rosette until the metal creaked. "We are not here to be worshipped." The ship's choir pit thrummed with a troubled chord. Psi oculators, blind, bandaged, embalmed in sanctified oils, rocked in their frames as the pulse threaded their withered nerves. One lifted its head, sockets turned toward the viewport, and spoke in a voice that carried the echo of dust on glass. "Confessor asks for proof, proof asks for witness, witness asks for flame, flame asks for silence, circle completes, circle completes." Rhea strode to the rail over the choir, voice low and unornamented. Be instruments, not parchment. Tune to terra, not to ghosts. The psyker's spines arched, the discord folding back into a single note of obedience. The pulse faltered for a heartbeat. Far below, one of the constructs blurred at the edges, almost as if embarrassed by its own shape. Kale's fingers danced across his console. I can route a null pattern through the shield harmonics. No signal, no heat signature, no mass resonance. A blank. If the constructs mirror, they'll mirror nothing. A sanctified nothing. One we choose. She nodded once. Do it. He cut power in precise bands, carving absences through the peregrine's systems like negative space in a fresco. Lights dimmed by degrees until the bridge hovered at the threshold of darkness. The roar of the reactor receded to a domestic murmur. Even their breath felt narrower, edited. Rhea tasted metal and cold linen and the unseasoned edge of fear. The void shields shimmered, not luminous now, but implied, a mathematical promise. Outside, the constructs stilled, their radiance guttered, their perfect circles dimming until each palm held only a clean, deliberate dark. They did not lower their arms. They did not approach. They stood as if listening to a sermon that had forgotten words. Hold, Rhea said, every syllable nailed into place. Keep the null. Let them tire of reflection. Minutes stretched like wire. The planet pulsed. Less gold, more breath. Systems across the ship flickered between life and restraint. Kale's hands went bone-white on the console's rim. Inquisitor, we can't keep this state. This much absence will trigger the reactor scrams. We become a cold stone with a name. We have too many names already. Give up the auxiliary decks. Keep the spine. He obeyed. Below their feet, the peregrine shed its peripheral luxuries. The barracks turned to stillness. The archivums whispered their last lights out. The devotional galleries folded their candles like tired wings. The ship shrank to intention and steel.
A tremor passed through the nearest construct. Something in the stance softened, as though the figure had decided it was permitted to be uncertain. It lowered one arm and placed palm to breast, a gesture that should have been oath and looked like apology. Where it touched, the twisted aquila smoothed, only for a breath, only almost, and then relaxed back into error. They're trying to remember us as we remember ourselves, Kale whispered. Not only what we did, what we meant by it. Meaning is a knife. Everyone wants to hold the handle. A new motion pricked the horizon, not constructs now, but a slow, deliberate shadow lowering through the clouds with the authority of scripture. A gun cutter in the livery of the Adeptus Custodes would have painted the sky with glory. This vessel wore no such sanctity. It fell like a verdict disguised as patience. Vox wards keying to the rosette flared and fell back confused. Recognized, denied, recognized again. Kale's throat clicked dry. Identify? Unknown, Rhea said, though the shape of the answer already moved at the edge of thought. Vector from high orbit, unsanctioned channel. They think the void is a court, and we are here to attend. The cutter's prow opened like a book. A single figure descended on a column of heat, trailing a cloak that drank the light. Not gold, not red. Black so complete the eye skittered. No heraldry, no badge. At the throat, a rosette the color of old bone. Kale exhaled a word that was less name than warning. Ordo Hereticus, Rhea finished. But there was something occluded in the syllables, a hesitation that did not belong to fear. She drew herself to full height. Bridge to landing bay, denied docking, ready sanctified shot. The reply came hollow with shock. Inquisitor, it's not docking, it's inside! The air on the bridge folded. A smell like extinguished candles in iron after rain slipped through the seams of their seals. Between one blink and the next, the figure stood at the threshold of the command, boots leaving no scuff, cloak touching nothing. The helm was featureless, polished into the suggestion of a face as blank as a sealed reliquary.
The rosette at the throat was wrong by a hair, a breath, a prayer. 3 intersecting lines hid in the filigree like a sin trusting its disguise. Ria Voss, the figure said, voice dry enough to take the ink from a page, you are relieving yourself of command. Kale's hand went to his sidearm. Ria did not look at him. By whose writ? The helm tilted. By silence. The constructs outside lifted their heads together as though the word had rung a bell inside their perfect emptiness.
Rhea stepped away from the lectern and stood on the line between the bridge and the intruder, as if balancing on the spine of a blade. If you are what wore our rosette below, she said, then you are not Inquisition. I am Remainder, the thing answered, and Kale made a small, involuntary sound, as if a man had recognized his own handwriting on a wall no one else could see. Rhea raised the rosette high. The symbol burned, white and clean, and the wrongness in the figure's device showed its seam. For an instant, its outline stuttered. The cloak flickered. Beneath it was no body, only an arrangement of places where a body could have been. You learned too much from us, she said. Now learn refusal. She turned her wrist. The rosette's light sharpened into a blade of absence, a thin white that carved shadows without touching metal. The figure regarded it with the mild interest of a clerk reading a familiar clause, and took one step forward. The peregrine groaned like a cathedral settling after an earthquake. Far below, Velis Magnus' pulse doubled. Hold, Rhea whispered. Not to Kale, not to the crew, but to the part of the ship that believed it was a promise and brought the light down. The light met the dark in a shriek too high for sound. The blade of the rosette carved through the false inquisitor's shape, and what poured out was not blood, but memory, bright motes of gold unraveling into lines of script that hung in the air before fading to dust. The figure staggered, its form struggling to decide what it was made of, cloak unraveling into smoke, armor flickering between reflection and emptiness. For in heartbeat Rhea saw faces within it. Lauren Vex, the astropaths, even Elora Voss, all flickering like trapped insects behind glass, each mouth forming the same word, accurate. Kale stumbled backward, arm raised to shield himself from the light. Inquisitor, its core is phasing. It's drawing energy from the ship. I see it, she whispered. The rosette's light was eating itself, devouring its own brilliance to keep existing. She could feel it draining her, too, the years that she had spent in the Emperor's service, unspooling one heartbeat at a time. Still, she held the blade steady. You want our names, she said to the dissolving shadow, then bear the cost of memory. The figure laughed, though it had no mouth. The sound was the shatter of ice on steel. You mistake devotion for theft, it said. We only keep what you abandon. You make ashes, we make archives. The light flared. For a moment, everything froze. The ship, the crew, the constructs outside, even the planet's pulse. Then reality resumed with violence. The bridge deck split like glass under pressure. Kale fell, catching the console with one hand, dangling over a chasm of radiant nothing. Rhea lunged, caught his wrist, her gauntlet slipping on sweat and blood. Hold, she shouted. I can't, he gasped. It's pulling me. He looked down, and Rhea saw what he saw. The void below was not black, but golden, full of faces turning slowly, reaching upward, whispering the same rhythm as the heartbeat of the planet. Circle completes, circle completes. Rhea braced her boots and hauled him up. The instant his feet hit the deck, she pressed her gauntlet to the comm bead. Bridge to engine sanctum. Prepare full warp shunt. Sacrifice sequence Delta Primus. Kale stared at her horrified. That'll tear us out of orbit. We'll be lucky to survive translation. We don't need luck. We need distance. In the belly of the peregrine, servitors obeyed her command without comprehension. Valves opened, reactors screamed, and the Geller field, holy barrier between material and warp, shuddered under reversal. The air thickened, tasting of burned copper and prayer.
Space folded, and Velis Magna's dying glow stretched like melted gold across the stars. The false Inquisitor straightened, its body reforming in the turbulence. "You cannot flee remembrance," it said, almost tenderly. "You are written into us." "Then I will be the line that breaks the page," Rhea said. She drove the blade forward, the figure shattered like a mirror dropped onto stone, each shard freezing mid-air before imploding into sparks. The shockwave tore through the bridge, throwing Kale and half the crew to the floor. Systems howled as the warp drive caught, folded, and tore. The last thing Rhea saw of Velis Magna was its surface blooming in pure light. The constructs raised their hands as if in benediction, and the planet's crust collapsed inward. Not explosion, not destruction, but closure. A perfect circle sealing itself. The pulse stopped. Then came the tearing, and the stars fell away. When the peregrine reemerged, it was not in known space. The charts showed nothing. The void was a flat horizon of cold white, unbroken. The instruments that still worked returned no readings. There was no warp signature, no gravity, no distance, only the steady vibration of the ship's heart, like an echo of the one they had left behind. Kale rose slowly, blood streaking his face, eyes unfocused. "Inquisitor, did we make it?" Rhea holstered the rosette, now dim as bone. "We made something." He looked to the viewport. In the distance, if distance meant anything here, a single golden sphere floated, small as a seed, pulsing faintly. It might have been a memory, or it might have been Velis Magna reborn in some pocket of unreality. "What is it?" he whispered.
Remainder, she said. He turned to her, expression brittle. Then what are we? She met his eyes, the faithful. For a long time, neither spoke. The ship drifted through the white void, silent but alive. Somewhere deep in the hall, the servitors began humming, soft, wordless, almost human. Rhea Voss closed her eyes and let the silence settle. For the first time, it did not feel like absence. It felt like witness. Far away, the golden sphere pulsed once more, not with heartbeat, with breath. And the Inquisition, in all its power and fear, would never speak of Velis Magna again. The white void held like a closed eyelid, untroubled by stars. The peregrine of St. Daxos drifted with the dignity of a ruined cathedral, its hull scorched and quiet, its vox arrays folded like broken wings. In the bridge's dim sanctum, Rhea Voss stood with her helm cradled under one arm and watched the golden sphere tremble on the horizonless plain. It pulsed the way a candle would pulse behind frosted glass, warming nothing, illuminating nothing, insisting only on the fact of its persistence. Kale Dravik leaned against a ruined console with a medic's wrap tight around his ribs, every breath careful. Far below them, the choir pit rocked with small movements, psychers shifting in their bindings, as if the dream had not ended with translation, only changed its language. They had counted time by litany and machine tick until the chronos surrendered, returning the same moment again and again, as if the hour itself refused to advance. Food came up from the sanctum in ration bars that tasted of chalk and burnt incense. Water had a memory of copper pipes and prayers. The ship still hummed, but the pitch was wrong, a half step lower than it had been in any known orbit, as though the Geller field remembered a pressure that no longer pressed back. "Nothing aligns," Kale said. "Not the auspex, not the star maps, not the sacristy charts. If this is the warp, it's a chamber of it that forgot how to be wild. Or it learned manners," Rhea said, not looking away from the sphere. "Silence can be polite. Silence can be a trap. Only if you expect it to say yes." She set the helm on the lectern, and keyed a ship-wide whisper, a soft vox bleed that would reach the edges of the hull without waking the dead circuits. Bridge to sanctum. Engine litany status. The reply wandered back like a tired pilgrim. Low and holding, Inquisitor. We can breathe and move in the same hour, but not fast.
That will suffice. Choir? A different voice, the mistress of the pit, dry as stasis wool. Sleeping with their eyes, dreams are neat and lined like script. I do not trust neat dreams. Rhea closed the channel and flexed the fingers of her right hand until the ache in the joints pushed thought into a narrower, cleaner corridor. The rosette on her gorget lay dull as carved bone. When she tilted it, a faint grain of light traveled beneath the surface like a fish through shallow water, then was still. She remembered the false rosette's seam and the way the blade had sounded when it kissed the remainder's cloak. She remembered the laugh that had not needed a mouth. She refused to remember the faces. "Do you believe that thing is Velis Magna?" Kale asked, nodding toward the sphere. "The whole of it, folded until prayer became density?" "I believe it is something that calls itself remainder." She let the word take shape without owning it. "Our archive of absence has entries with no coordinates and no cause, only the note, name struck by conclave vote. Perhaps those worlds breathed like this for a while and then learned how to be quiet forever." "Or someone taught them," Kale said, voice turned inward. The rumor at Skola was that on certain days, when the astronomicon brightened like a bell and then dimmed, the Emperor's light had bent to seal what could not be burned, that the Adeptus Custodes escorted the light like a knife carried in a sheath. "We don't write that down. We write that the light is constant." "Rumor is a salter's sickness," she said, though she did not say it with the correction of doctrine, more like a woman reading a prescription aloud and wondering who wrote the dosage. "If custodians walked where we walked, it would not be rumor, it would be law." She allowed herself a breath that was not quite a sigh. "But law is ridden by the ones allowed to speak." They waited while the sphere pulsed, counting its rhythm until it counted them back. The first change came as a taste, bitter almond and the wax of old candles, then as a scent like cold marble washed in river water. Rhea stiffened. Pit reports a stirring. The vox chimed once, in her gorget, the discreet ring they kept for corridors where fear needed the dignity of form. "Inquisitor," the mistress of the pit said, "one of the bound has begun transcription in his sleep. Letters under the lids, words on the tongue. I have wrapped his hands, but the nails bleed text. Bring him gently, no cuts, no stains." They carried the psyker to the bridge on a litter of sanctified canvas. He was thin as wire, skin the color of old wax, lips stitched with prayer thread that had been broken and then retied, broken and then retied again across campaigns. His sockets were bandaged in linen, marked with ecclesiarchal sigils that had once been red and now had the faded pink of memories washed too often. Even with the careful handling, flakes of dried blood fell from the corners of his eyes like winter. He breathed with deliberation, as if the lungs were a machine he had the courtesy to consult before using. On the webbing of his hands, the half-moons where fingernails had written against bindings shone wet and precise. Rhea stood at his head and placed 2 fingers to his brow. Not blessing, not command, contact. Name. The lips moved. No sound came. Then the tongue shaped a syllable that could have been anyone's. "Rem," he whispered, and the rest of the word hid as if embarrassed by its simplicity. Kale leaned closer, careful to let his shadow fall across none of the saint-inked linen. "Do you see the sphere?" The psyker's mouth tightened in what might have been a smile if pain were allowed to smile. "I see a cathedral with no doors. I see a ledger with no ink. I see a hand turning a page that is not there and is always there." He swallowed, and Rhea heard the faint crackle of dry membranes. "I see gold behind glass." "Is it alive?" Rhea asked.
"In the way a vow is alive," he whispered. "In the way a number is alive when placed where a name should be." His fingers twitched against the bindings, and fresh script rose beneath the skin in threads of bruised violet. "Do not ask me to enter it. Do not ask me to knock." "We will not," Rhea said, and meant it. The sphere pulsed again, closer now, though no instrument had registered movement. The white void did not compress or expand, it simply allowed the sense of distance to be negotiated. On the viewport's glass, condensation traced the faintest suggestion of a sigil, 3 lines, gone as soon as Kale's breath fogged the pane. He stepped back as if something living had regarded him through the film. "Did we bring it with us?" he asked softly, "or did it bring us?" Rhea considered the rosette's pale face and the small warm weight it had left in her palm when it burned. The difference may be doctrine. The consequence is the same. Without warning, the ship sang. Not the servitors, not the choirs, not the honest loans of men and women doing as they were told. The ship. Ribs. Keel. Plates. A single note rose from the bones, held too pure for comfort, and the white void answered with a resonance that had not been there until it was. The golden sphere swelled, tide without sea, and in its light Rhea thought she saw a suggestion of auramite, curves and edges, a helm like a sun's idea of a face moving with slow gravity around a door that did not exist. It was only an impression, a rumor made of radiance. She framed it as liturgy in her mind so it would not become law. The thought came as it had to the students in their cold bunks at Scola. Perhaps the light does bend. Perhaps there are hands that guide it where no proclamation can follow. Perhaps judgment has shapes we are not graded to name. Kale's voice was barely air. "If that is what I think it is." "It is not," she said, and the denial was a mercy rather than a correction. "It is what it needs to be to keep its vow." The note in the hull faded by small degrees until it was again the old service hum. The sphere settled back to its seed size and beat its measured beat. The psyker on the litter relaxed by a finger width in the bandages and whispered a word that might have been accurate or might have been nothing at all. Rhea opened her eyes. She had not known they were closed. "Set a new litany in the engine sanctum. We will shift on bearings that are not bearings, and see if distance behaves. No thrust beyond a pilgrim's pace. Choir remains bound, dreaming with their eyes. Let no one say this place's name aloud."
Kale nodded, because he had nothing else left that was useful to do. In the viewport, the seed of gold watched them not watching it, and the white void arranged itself to permit a kind of travel that did not believe in miles. Somewhere in the Peregrine's archives, a dormant file stirred, empty of words, titled only with a single struck line where a world's name had been. The record opened of its own accord and waited like a mouth a fraction before prayer. "Rhea," Kale said, not inquisitor now, not subordinate, only a man who had learned accompaniment. "If it asks to be forgotten again, will we obey?" She rested her palm on the dead rosette and felt, brief and impossible, the warmth of a sun she had never seen. If it asks as a witness, yes. If it asks as a weapon, no. He nodded, as though that distinction could be lived without being measured, and the ship began to move without the sense of moving, gliding across a whiteness that had agreed to pretend to be a road. The golden seed brightened once, the way a sleeping thing will turn on its side, and the psyker sank deeper into bindings that smelled of stasis and old hymns. Far below, in the sanctum where valves whispered, someone dropped a prayer bead and it rolled in a circle and came back to the same hand. The void, having answered, kept its counsel. The hum became language, It started in the pipes, low and patient, then climbed the ribs of the peregrine until the sound gathered behind the walls, murmuring syllables that no one aboard remembered teaching it. Cale froze at the helm, fingers trembling over the controls. "Inquisitor," he whispered. "The ship is answering itself." Rhea said nothing. The sound was not hostile. It was inquisitive, like a child tracing the outline of its own shadow. The words it formed were faint, drawn from liturgies no longer sanctioned, psalms once used to name stars now forgotten. Benedicere per numerum, benedicere per ignem. Blessing by number, blessing by fire. She reached toward the console, and the metal shivered under her touch, warm as skin. "The void is taking inventory," she murmured. "Every thought, every oath, every sin written into the hull. It remembers the cost of its creation." Cale's voice shook. "Can the ship remember guilt?" "All things can, even saints." The psyker on the litter stirred again. His head turned toward the viewport, and his bandaged eyes wept thin trails of light, gold and trembling. His mouth opened, and the voice that came was not his. "Archivum veritas, inquisitrix rea vos, authorization confirmed, record retrieval, judgment event." Cale stepped forward, horrified. That's the ship's archive protocol, but he's accessing it without a slate. Rhea knelt beside the psyker, her hands steady despite the rising chill in the air. "Proceed," she said softly.
The body convulsed. The voice did not falter. Judgment event. Velis magna. Classification: apostatic silence. Cause: inquiry exceeding jurisdiction. Response: absorption. Resolution: observation ongoing. "What does that mean?" Cale demanded. "Observation ongoing? We burned the planet! There's nothing left to observe!" The ship trembled, and the lights flared, every lumen on every deck igniting at once, as if the peregrine had drawn breath for the first time. On the viewport, the white void rippled. The golden seed split, unfolding like a flower of light, revealing layers within layers, cathedrals inverted into themselves, spires growing downward, streets turning in upon their own reflections. The scale was impossible. Velis Magna had not died. It had been inverted, folded into an idea too vast for material space. Cale fell to his knees. "Emperor, preserve us!" Rhea's heart slowed. The sight did not terrify her. It clarified her. "It was never judgment," she said quietly. "It was record-keeping." The psyker's voice changed again, calmer now, closer to human. "Every act of the Inquisition must be witnessed, every silence catalogued, every fire remembered. You tried to erase a world. The archive disagreed." Cale rose slowly, eyes wide. "It's holding us as evidence." "Not us," Rhea said. "Me." The light beyond the glass intensified, until it was no longer distinguishable from the ship's illumination. Figures appeared within the radiance, too tall, too still, armor that gleamed not with polish, but with certainty. They moved with the weight of final purpose. Cale whispered the word like a prayer and a curse. "Custodes." But Rhea shook her head. "No. Shadows of them. Echoes of the Emperor's will, not the will itself." She drew herself to full height, meeting their gaze through the brilliance. "I serve the throne. If I have erred, then let it be measured." The figures did not answer. Instead, the psyker's body arched, mouth stretching wider than any human throat should allow, and from it came the low, harmonized hum of the void itself. It was not judgmental. It was procedural. Record, confirm, preserve. Rhea looked down at him and felt, for the first time in her long career, the thinness of distinction between faith and confession. If this is the Emperor's audit, then let it be thorough. The ship's systems flickered. Every archive opened itself.
Every report, every confession, every classified act of zeal and heresy alike. For an instant, Rhea saw her entire life rendered in data, the flame of worlds she had condemned, the mercy she had denied, the brief moments of doubt that had crept like cracks into her armor. Each line of text burned, not as accusation, but as illumination. She could not hide, and strangely, she did not wish to.
The white void darkened, not with shadow, but with depth. The seed of gold collapsed inward once more, sealing itself. The ship fell quiet, its hum settling into the old, familiar rhythm of human imperfection. The psyker lay still. The last words that left his lips were almost tender. Observation concluded. Rhea stood in silence. The rosette at her chest warmed against her armor, as though acknowledging receipt of a message. Kale's breathing steadied behind her. "Are we free?" he asked. "No," she said, turning from the viewport. "We are remembered." Outside, the void flickered once more. Something vast and unseen turned its attention elsewhere, satisfied. The void slept, in colorless suspension, a calm without direction, yet every instrument aboard the Peregrine trembled as if beneath a heartbeat far too vast to name. The white plane no longer pulsed, it breathed, and the breath was data, slow, measured, recursive, rewriting itself within the silence. Rhea Voss stood in the bridge's gloom, her reflection hovering above the black glass of the viewport like an echo that refused to leave her side. The rosette on her breastplate glowed faintly again, a pulse out of rhythm with her heart. It reminded her of the Astronomicon's flicker, how the Emperor's light could stutter even while infinite, how even divinity must blink to endure itself. She did not speak at first. Words felt like theft here. Kale was still at his console, though the console no longer obeyed. Its symbols changed on their own, rearranging into a language that did not belong to men. He wiped his eyes as if clearing mist. "Inquisitor," he said. "The logs are rewriting, every archive, not erasing, refactoring, as though a greater hand were adjusting syntax." "Correction," she murmured. "Not erasing, not replacing, curating." He looked at her then, fear hollowing him more than fatigue ever had. By what authority could "The only one that doesn't need to ask," she said. She stepped toward the viewport. The golden sphere that had been Velis Magna hung before them once more. But now it was no longer a planet. It was an eye, open and infinite, an iris of rotating citadels and solar rings, all orbiting a pupil of pure dark. Within that dark, something vast moved. Kale's voice came as a whisper dragged through disbelief. "Is that him?" Rhea did not answer. She had heard the stories, all the liturgies, all the revisions. The Emperor, enthroned and eternal, his body the conduit for humanity's guiding light. But that was the doctrine of those who required stability, not comprehension. What she saw now was not a body, not even a will. It was a pattern, something that recognized all that it had created and held it in unbearable equilibrium. It was memory and heartbeat, as if a war game completely unloud. The vox crackled softly. A voice spoke through it, calm as distant thunder, without origin, without end. "All Inquisitions report, submit record, account balance." Kale flinched. "It's asking for us." "No," Rhea said.
It's asking for truth. She removed her helm and placed it gently upon the console, as if the act itself were confession. Her reflection in the glass met her eyes. "Transmission channel open," she said. "By writ of Ordo Hereticus, Inquisitrix, Rea Vos, survivor of Velis Magna, I submit the record." The void brightened until the bridge was a cathedral made of glass and silence. The air filled with the scent of incense and ozone, and from the light came sound. Not voice, not music, but something between. Her mind filled with visions, one upon another, each judgment she had ever passed, every man burned, every woman purged, every whisper silenced in the name of order. She saw herself from the outside, smaller each time. And beyond those memories, she saw other inquisitors, thousands of them, each one reporting, each one illuminated by their own fire, all their sins merging into one vast ledger written in light and ash. Cale fell to his knees, his eyes glassy. They're all here. Every world, every purge, every unrecorded mercy. It's everything we've done. Rhea's breath caught, but not from terror, from recognition. The Emperor's ledger was not punishment. It was mathematics. Every act, every soul, measured against its consequence. No bias, no love, no forgiveness. Only precision. The voice filled the void again, stronger now. Inquisitrix Rea Vos, judgment event Velis Magna recorded as anomaly. Input verification required. Did silence equal salvation? The question struck her like gravity. Silence equal salvation. She remembered the dust figures on the planet, the echoes of the dead asking only to be remembered accurately. She remembered commanding the orbital fire to burn what could no longer be understood. And she remembered the stillness afterward, how it had not felt like victory, but witness. She lifted her chin. Silence was not salvation, she said slowly. It was comprehension. It was the moment truth realized it could no longer be spoken aloud. The light pulsed once, as if listening, then again, softer, accurate. The golden eye folded upon itself, collapsing into a perfect circle of brightness so pure that even shadow bowed to it. And in that moment, Rhea felt a strange peace, not the kind offered by redemption, but the kind that follows acknowledgement. The peregrine shuddered. Systems reignited one by one, obedient once more. Stars reappeared where there had been none. The white void fell away, replaced by the soft indigo of the segmentum obscurus rim. The golden sphere was gone. Cale looked around in disbelief. We're back. The charts. By the throne, Inquisitor were in real space.
Rhea turned toward him, her voice quiet. Real enough. He laughed once, too sharply, on the edge of tears. Do we report this? The archive? The voice? All of it? She thought of the word that had followed her since the beginning. Accurate. Not true, not righteous, just accurate. The universe had no need for embellishment. No, she said. We record what the Inquisition requires, and we remember what the universe revealed. Cale nodded, his hands trembling. And if they ask what became of Velis Magna? Rhea looked through the viewport at the distant stars. We will tell them it learned to listen. The bridge fell silent again, not empty, but whole. The rosette at her chest flickered once more, and this time she understood the rhythm. It was not heartbeat, not warning, but punctuation, a period at the end of a sentence the Imperium would never read aloud. Outside, the warp shimmered at the edge of vision, watching, recording, patient as ever. Somewhere within it, perhaps a golden seed pulsed quietly in memory of a world that had been erased, yet persisted anyway. Rhea reached for her helm, placed it on her head, and sealed it with a hiss. Set course for Terra. The Emperor keeps his ledger. It's time we balanced ours. Kale engaged the engines, and the Peregrine moved into the dark, leaving behind no trace but a single brief echo. Accurate. And then even that was gone.